So this session is being recorded for those who are joining now. So if you do not want to be seen in the video, then feel free to turn off your cameras. It is being recorded, and I think I'll start. People can always, as you know, there's two presentations going on at the same time, so feel free to switch between the breakout rooms, join Nadia's session, pop in and out as you wish. But I think I'll get started now, otherwise I won't make it through in time. So welcome, thanks so much for joining today. A few words about myself. For those who don't know me, my name is Dominic. I am a career coach. I work with people, professionals who want to make a change in their career. I support them in finding clarity, figuring out what they want, what they're passionate about, and how they can combine that in creating a career that's in line with their values. I help them overcome challenges on the way to reaching their goals. And I also support them in their personal branding and with their mental health. Now, it might seem odd at first why a career coach would be concerned with mental health, but it's actually a very big part of my work. And most of it, anxiety and fear, which is today's topic. But why am I even talking about fear? Why did I choose this topic? So there's a few reasons for this. First, as I said, it is part of my job. So a lot of people that I work with, they are somewhere in a stage where things are not going well for them in their jobs. They're unhappy, they're unfulfilled, unmotivated, or in certain cases, they're overwhelmed, they're close to a burnout. And there's a lot of job-related anxiety for a lot of people. But then when I start working with them, or people who are actually making the decision that something needs to change, I want to change into a new career, that again is a very stressful event that can cause more anxiety and more fear. So it is a big part of the work that I do. Also, as you know, this week is European Mental Health Week. So I was looking at the latest statistics, and I was unfortunately not surprised to find that this is from 2023, that anxiety disorders are the #1 mental health disorder in the European Union. And by the way, I checked the numbers for Switzerland. They're the same, almost exactly the same. So 14% of the population has suffered from an anxiety disorder at one point in the year 2023. I think it's a very important topic to talk about, because the whole point of the European Mental Health Week is to raise awareness of these issues and to break down stigma around these mental health issues. And then there's a third reason I'm talking about anxiety, and that is because of my own experience. I'm one of the 14% too, or at least I used to be. For me, what started as a fear of public speaking when I was 16, 17, turned into a panic disorder later, and then into a generalized anxiety disorder. So for me, it all started again when I was 16, 17. I was in high school, and I was still remember the day. I was about to give a presentation in front of my class. I never liked giving presentation. I never liked to be in the center of attention anyway. I was a very shy, introverted child and young adult. But on that particular day, I was there in front of my class, and as I was about to start giving my speech, I could feel my hands shaking. That was nothing new. My hands were always shaking, but that day was even more. I started feeling dizzy and nauseous. I felt like I might faint soon. And then also my heart was beating rapidly. I couldn't properly breathe, didn't have enough breath to really talk. And then what happened is I had this tingling sensation in my fingers that started spreading over my arms into my shoulders. And I had no idea what was going on with me. It was really scary. And somehow, I don't remember how, I was able to finish my presentation. And when I sat down again, I was shaking. I was completely exhausted, drained of energy. And I didn't know what was happening to me or what just happened. Only later, I learned that that was my first panic attack. I didn't know what it was. I didn't think it was a heart attack. I was still too young for that at that point. But it's a fact that a lot of people, when they experience their first panic attack, they actually think it's a heart attack because the symptoms are so similar. So for me, it only got worse from then on. As you can imagine, I started to avoid these kind of situations. I would call in sick whenever I had to give another speech. Later on, I didn't even have to pretend to be sick. I would actually get sick the day before a presentation. I would get a headache or a stomach ache. And not only that, also this fear started to spread into other areas of my life. I was not just afraid anymore of talking in front of my class, but also in front of friends or even back home, my family. And so it really spread and later became this generalized anxiety disorder. By the end of high school, my plan was to go to university, but I had no idea how I would be able to do that. I knew it would mean more public speaking, more presentations, and I could not see myself doing that. But I knew I really wanted to go. So I needed help. And that was the first time I went to therapy. Later, it would go for many years. I would go to different types of therapies. I started doing research. I started reading a lot about anxiety, about fear, because I wanted to understand what was going on. What is causing all of this? And more importantly, what could I do to get rid of my fears and to go back and living a normal life? And today, what I want to share with you is some of the most important things that I learned on my journey. And well, up front, the one thing I want to share is, or my biggest lesson, my biggest learning is that our fear is not our enemy. If anything, it's our friend. So I'm very careful these days to not talk about conquering your fear or fighting your fear. If anything, I believe your fear is your compass. It took me a long time to get to this concept to understand it. And I want to tell you a bit about this later, how I came to this conclusion that fear is actually a compass, but it's definitely not our enemy. And one other thing I want to talk about today is mindfulness, because mindfulness is the tool that helped me change my perception of fear, to help me accept my fears, to work with them, to live with them, and to eventually use them as a compass, that are the fear that's pointing me to somewhere or something that is important to me. Let's start with mindfulness. And just because mindfulness is such a big topic these days, when I went to therapy 25 years ago, nobody talked about mindfulness. And I only discovered this later in life, but these days, mindfulness, everybody talks about it. Still, there are so many misconceptions about what it is. So I want to make sure we're on the same page. And a simple definition of mindfulness is this one. It's to be intentionally aware of the present moment with full acceptance and without judgment. Now, that sounds pretty simple, right? But I think we all know that simple doesn't always mean easy. So let's take it apart. To be intentionally aware of the present moment. And of course, the key word here is the present moment, which is that elusive state, something that we cannot really grasp. It's here and then it's gone. We cannot think about the present moment. We can think about the past, we can think about the future, but the present moment we can really only experience. So if I say we cannot think about the present moment, then that already poses a challenge, because if we are to believe certain studies, on average, a human being has 50,000 to 70,000 thoughts per day. Or this other study that came out of Harvard about 10 years ago that found that we spend 47% of our waking time thinking. Now, if we cannot be at the same time in the present moment while we are thinking, then we spend almost half of our time not in the present moment. This is only thoughts. I'm not even talking about external distractions. If you think about our smartphones these days, reminders, notifications, emails, and so on. So just our thoughts. And our mind naturally is always looking for distractions. That's a concept, or that's something that's as old as humanity. In Buddhism, you may have heard of this. This is what they refer to as the monkey mind. Buddha himself spoke of the human mind as being filled with a bunch of drunken monkeys jumping around, screeching, chattering endlessly, and that we all have a monkey mind. And now, again, there's a misconception that meditation or mindfulness practice is about having a blank mind, right? It's having no thoughts at all, having no emotions, but that's actually not the case. If we come back to this, it means to be aware of the present moment. So it just means whatever's going on right now, to be aware of it. We let the monkeys chatter. We're not trying to silence them. We're not trying to shut them out. If we do that, they will only come back louder. There's this saying, what you resist persists. And so we let the monkeys chatter, we let them do their thing, but we do it, and here's where the second part is so important, we do it with full acceptance and without judgment. Now that can be very challenging too, because I think we are judgmental by nature. If we experience something, it's like an automatic reaction. We like it or we don't like it. And especially if we experience negative feelings or thoughts, like for example, fear, the automatic reaction is we don't like it. We don't want to feel afraid. We want it gone. And it can be really hard to fully accept a feeling like fear without judging it. And it took me at least a long time, a lot of practice, and above all, it takes a lot of self-compassion. So that's another very important ingredient in mindfulness. Now let's see how this all applies to fear. And by the way, fear and anxiety, they're technically not the same, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm using the terms interchangeably, just in case you were wondering. Let's look at fears. We need to distinguish between very broadly, between two types of fear. On the one hand, there's rational fear. This is what we all remember back from biology at school, I think. That's our body's natural survival mechanism. It's the fear that occurs, the physical reaction in the face of an actual imminent threat, the fight or flight response. The body releases hormones, adrenaline, our muscles tense, and gets us ready to either run away or to attack. On the other hand, there's irrational fear. Now, rational fear is when we feel the same, when our body shows the same reaction, we feel that fear even though there's no actual threat, or at least the amount of fear that we feel is in no relationship to the nature of the threat, or that the outcome that we fear is very unlikely. So you see, irrational fear, it already gets a bit more complex, and there is no clear line, there's no black and white between rational and irrational fear. Irrational fear, it always depends on the situation, the person experiencing the situation, because even that frog, there's people who are terribly afraid of frogs. It's called ranilophobia. But then let's say you're in the jungle and you see a frog that might be poisonous. In that case, it's much more rational to be afraid of a frog. It's not always clear, and I want us to keep that in mind as we move forward. But I'm showing this because I want to, remind you that when I talk about fear going forward, I always talk about irrational fear. Now, within irrational fear, and I'm not going into too much detail here, we have further groups. There's generalized anxiety disorder. There are phobias, which are intense fears of specific objects or things, like the fear of spider or the fear of flying. And then what I really want to talk about today are social fears. Social fear are characterized by anxiety or fear that comes up in social or in performance situations. So a person suffering from social fear, they are in moments where they're being observed or scrutinized. The fear there is around being humiliated, being criticized. And it may come as no surprise to you that actually the number one social fear is the fear of public speaking. Now, when I heard that for the first time, it was actually a relief because I thought, oh, I'm not alone. And that helped me a lot with, starting to accept my fear. Because so far back in high school, when I had that, I was convinced I'm the only person suffering from that. Everybody else seemed so relaxed. And when they were up in front of the class giving a presentation, and nobody talked about it. I didn't talk to anyone about this, how afraid I was. Only later, when I started talking to people more, others would tell me, I'm just as afraid and I'm super anxious when I have to give a talk. But we don't see that, we don't talk about it. So it helped me to feel that I'm not alone. Still, I wanted to know more, like where is it coming from? What's the cause of all of this? What's causing these social fears? And here's another very interesting or insightful learning that I had that helped me a lot to better understand my fear. And that is the fact that there's an intimate relationship between our needs on the one hand and our fear on the other hand, to a degree where we can actually say, where there is no need, there is no fear. This was very important for me to understand, but where there is no need, there is no fear. What that means is we can express every fear, or we can see every fear as an expression of a need. Let's look at a few examples. For example, the fear of change, that can be understood as our need for, or a need for stability. Or something even more fundamental, our fear of death is nothing else than an expression of our need for life. Now, with social fear, here's where it gets interesting. At the core of all social fears is the fear of rejection. And that's an expression of our need for social connection, which is one of the most basic psychological human needs. Maybe you remember back in school, Maslow's pyramid, we have the basic needs like food and air and shelter. And when it comes to these psychological needs, it's the need for social connection. And here is also where the paradox comes in, because normally we know fear is a protection mechanism. Our fear is pointing us away from danger. But in this case, somebody who's suffering from social fear is usually what happens is these people or persons isolate themselves more and more because they avoid social situations like I did in the past. And so what happens, their social connections weaken. They get less social connections. So the very need that this fear is an expression of is not being met. And we're being caught in a negative spiral. And this is where this idea of the compass comes from. So when it comes to social fears, to actually see, or other kinds of fears, what is the need behind this fear? Because there's always something there, something that's important, a need. And to sort of flip the compass around, and instead of giving into our fears and running the other way, it's facing towards our fears and going in that direction, or to try to see beyond that fear, to find what is the need that's behind that. That to me was, again, it took me a long time to understand, but it helped me a lot once I understood it and to be able to accept my fears better. They're not just there for no reason. There's something there. And usually it's something that's important. Otherwise, I wouldn't be afraid of it. If there was no need, then there would be no fear because it's not important to me. Now, let's see if we can bring this together. Before I talk about mindfulness again and how this fits in, let's look at what's called the circle of fear. So this is fear happening in a specific situation. Can be caused by an external event, but fear can also be caused just by a thought. But let's say it's an external event, and let's say in my case, it was, I have to give a speech in front of my class. So that produces certain thoughts. Am I well prepared? Will I be able? What if I forget my lines? And already this can cause some fear. And the fear causes a physical reaction, like my heart beating faster, and in my case, feeling dizzy. I perceive that, and then I think about it. What's happening to me? Why is my heart beating so fast? What if it won't stop? This creates more fear, which creates more physical reactions. And round we go until, in certain cases, or in my case sometimes, it ended in a full-blown panic attack. Now, where does mindfulness come in now to break the circle of fear? As you probably guessed, it's on this level here. It's thoughts. So let's think back what mindfulness actually does. First of all, mindfulness creates a distance. And that is because we're trying to distance ourselves from our thoughts, from our feelings. We don't identify completely with what we feel. I actually wanted to do a mindfulness exercise together with you, but in the end, we didn't have enough time. But there's many mindfulness exercises, for example, where you look at your thoughts and you put them on a leaf and you let them float down a stream. Or you look at trains and you see your thoughts in trains, in wagons, and you look at them passing by. So there's different methods, different techniques in mindfulness to do that. But the point is to create some distance, to not look from your thoughts, but to look at your thoughts. And by creating this distance, we can also do this by the way we use language. In the case of fear, if I say I am afraid, then I identify completely with this fear. If I'm afraid, then afraid is all that I am. But if I say something like, I have this feeling of fear, or right now I'm feeling this feeling of anxiety, that also creates a distance. It's something that I feel. I feel other things as well, but right now I also feel this feeling of anxiety. So creating a distance, that's the first thing that mindfulness does. The second thing, acceptance. First of all, by creating that distance, it makes it easier to look at a thought or a feeling and to accept it, to not judge it. And for me, as I said, the fact that fear is connected with me, there's a need behind it, make it a lot easier for me to accept. I knew there was some reason, there was something that's important to me. So distance and acceptance. And out of that, what happens is it gives us more room. It creates more options. Usually we just react automatically when we have this feeling or emotion. But with some distance and with being better able to accept it, we can decide, we can choose, how do we want to react in this situation? What do I want to do next? And then, of course, mindfulness is also something, especially if practiced regularly, can bring a lot of calm. Now, calm is important because fear creates a lot of energy. You think just the physical reaction, the hormones, the adrenaline that's released, that creates energy. And sometimes calm is good, but in specific cases, and that was especially the case for me, for example, before giving a presentation, let's say on a stage before a large audience, I still to this day, I don't have the calm, I don't have the nerve to sit down and do a breathing exercise. I'm much too excited, I have way too much energy. Some of that energy is good because I want to use it. And if you listen to actors, for example, even seasoned actors who've been in the business for a long time, they will still tell you that they have stage fright, that they feel some kind of fear. But then what they do is they use it. They use that energy and they put it into their performance. And that's what makes them such good actors. And so a bit of energy is good for a situation like a talk. But if it's too much, and there's other situations like when you have to do a test or an exam, you don't need all that energy because it makes it hard to focus. We need to release that energy sometimes. So I would usually find a quiet corner and do some squats or some push-ups and just release some of that energy because it can be too much. Now, to bring it all together, I just want to see where we are with the time. We still have a bit of time. And mindfulness can really help if practiced regularly. I think that's the important thing here. You cannot start practicing mindfulness when you're not in a good place. So I tried to start practicing mindfulness when I was at my worst, when I was having panic attacks, and that did not work. So it's really important to start practicing something like this in a time when you feel okay, when everything's well as it can be. And then you'll reap the rewards during times when things are not as well. You can then go back to this resource and use it. So if it's 5 minutes a day, if it's 10 minutes a day, mindfulness also is such a wonderful thing, because you don't have to sit down cross-legged on the floor on your yoga mat. You can practice mindfulness anywhere and everywhere. Because remember, it's just being aware of the present moment. You can do that while you're waiting for the bus. I do that in the morning when I boil the water for my coffee. It takes 1 minute, 90 seconds. In the past, I would run back to my computer in that moment, start up my machine, maybe already check the first few emails, and then go back when my water's ready. Now, I just stand next to the kettle and I don't do anything. I take these 90 seconds for myself to just be in the present moment. And it can be as easy as this, and you can spread this throughout your day, make it a habit. And this is what, in the end, over the long term, can do a lot, can have a lot of positive benefits, especially if, like me, fear and anxiety is something that's a big part of your life. All right, I'm at the end here, right on time. This is just for you, a few links. If you're interested, have a look at my website or my blog. I'll post lots of articles about fear, about other topics, or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to have a chat, to answer questions if somebody wants to ask me something. For me, one thing I did forget to mention is fear as a compass. For a long time, I was trying to find out, why am I so afraid of public speaking? If fear is really a compass, then it means public speaking is somehow important to me. And my very first time in therapy, I remember my therapist saying, one day you might become a big speaker. You might become a person that speaks in front of other people, maybe a teacher. And I remember at that time, I don't know what I answered or replied, but I most certainly thought, that's the craziest thing I ever heard. I mean, why would I do that? All I want to do is to get away from that. And yet here I am 25 years later, still anxious before talks, but I know now this is important to me. I know it aligns with my core values of sharing my experience with other people, in the hope that someone who hears this and is in a similar situation might benefit from it. So again, I invite you, next time you're afraid of something, try to figure out what's the need behind that. This is somehow important to you, otherwise you wouldn't be afraid of it. And try to find out if the fear that you feel is pushing you away from that, or if you can find a way to go towards it. Now, again, if you want to ask me any questions, contact me, or if you would like to have a talk, there's a QR code down here. You can schedule a free, completely non-binding session or call where we can talk in more detail about whatever it is you would like to talk about. I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you so much for joining this session. I wish you a good rest of your day and then a very nice weekend. Thank you. And of course, if you have any questions, I'm still here for 3-4 minutes. So feel free to let me know or write them into the chat. I'll be happy to answer them.